In this presentation, we will work a problem which will calculate current ratios, common size comparative income statement, and balance sheet trends. We're going to have our information up top. We're going to use that information to populate the blue areas down below. We do recommend setting up any problem in this format to have the information up top in Excel, words in separate cells as the numbers, so that we can refer to the numbers with references, that being the easiest way, best way to move forward. What we have in our data, so we got the income statement, we have the years 2000 X1, X2, X3, and we have the balance sheet, same items with 2000 X1, 2000 X2, and 2000 X3. We're going to go down and enter that into our data down below. We're going to start with the current ratio, very common ratio for ratio analysis, one of the most common ratios we will want to know and consider, and that's going to be the current assets divided by the current liabilities. Now, as you consider ratios, remember what you want to do is kind of know the formulas, memorize the formulas. In some cases, you may want to write them down. This is actually one case where writing them down rather than having them in Excel might be useful. But if you put them in, when we put them into Excel, note you might want to take that formula and then think about it in a more vertical step-by-step type of calculation fashion. In other words, rather than writing a long type of formula from left to right and then working the algebra, working the steps out in a step-by-step up and down vertical type calculation. So we have subtitles for each of the calculations, and I'll show you what we mean with the ratio analysis here and as we go through the ratios going forward. So the ratios are going to be the current ratio. It's going to be the current ratio will be current assets, so current assets, and we're going to pick up our current assets up top, so this is going to be equal to, we'll scroll back up top, we're looking for the 54,574 for 2000 and X1, and then we want the current liabilities, so we're going to say the next item will of course be those current liabilities, and we're going to say this equals, picking that information up top, and we're going to say the current liabilities to 23,230, and then we can divide those two out to get the current ratio. So then the current ratio, if we divide those out, will be equal to the 54,574 divided by the 23,230 and enter. So we got the 2.3. And so notice we're kind of listing this out vertically. This is a fairly quick ratio, but just be aware that as we go through these ratios and you put them into Excel, you might want to see them in a step-by-step format in this type of fashion. Let's do this for 2000 X2 now. We're going to say that current assets are going to be equal to, in 2000 and X2, the current assets of 36,527, enter. Current liabilities will be equal to, if we scroll back up, the 19,693 and enter. Then we'll divide these two out, equals the 36,527 divided by 19,693 and enter 1.9. Then we'll go to the current assets for 2000 X3. This is equal to, we scroll back up, the current assets 48,828. We're going to say enter and divide that by the current liabilities, which will be the 19,163 and enter. Then we'll divide those out. This equals the current assets divided by the current liabilities and enter. Now, of course, once we did the first item here, we could autofill this across. So if I was to delete these two and select the first item, we could then autofill across. If we put our cursor here and autofill across, it'll then pick up the relevant cells, or the relative cells, and there we go. So now let's do a common size comparative income statement. So again, 2000 X1, X2, X3, common size comparative income statement. We're going to pick up the data for the income statement with formulas. So within cell A33, we're going to say equals, and then we're going to go back up top and we are going to pick up the sales item on the income statement. Now I'm going to say enter, and then I'm going to autofill all the way down, which will pick up the relative references down to the net income. So we'll say enter, put our cursor back on that sales item. We'll be on the autofill handle, left click, scroll down, and we'll pick up the relative cells all the way down, and there we have that. Now we're going to pick up our information. Now when we do a common size comparative income statement, or let's just think of a common size income statement right now, what we're going to do is compare everything to sales. So we're going to say sales is the essence of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to generate revenue. Everything else we want then to compare as a relation to, as a ratio to the sales item. So that's what we're going to do. We'll start off with sales, which is going to be compared to itself and therefore 100%. So we'll say this is equal to, scrolling back up, the sales in B2 divided by the sales in B2, and enter. And that'll give us 100%. Again, it's B2 over B2. And then we'll go to the cost of goods sold. We're going to say the cost of goods sold is equal to, and scroll back up, and we're going to say the cost of goods sold, the 247,763 divided by the sales, 411,563, and enter. So we have cost of goods sold related to sales. Then the gross profit, we're going to say this equals, and scrolling back up, and we'll pick up the gross profit of the 163,802 and divide that by the 144,563 and enter. And then we'll do this for the selling expenses equals, and we'll scroll back up. Selling expenses is the 58,442 divided by the sales, the 144,563 and enter. Then we're in the admin expenses. We're going to say that equals, scrolling back up, we want the admin expenses is going to be the 37,041 divided by the 144, or the 411, 563 and enter. Total expenses is going to be equal to, and we'll scroll back up, total expenses, the 95,483 divided by the sales once again, and enter. We're almost there. We're going to say this is equal to, for the income tax, the income before taxes is equal to the income before taxes, the 68,319 divided by the 411,563 and enter. And then the income tax expense will be equal to, scrolling back up, and we want the 12,707 divided by the 411,563, and one more time for the net income equal to, scrolling back up, we'll pick up the 55,612 divided by the 411,563. Now, is there an easier way to do that? Could we use autofill in other words? We could. So I'm going to say, all right, let's delete this and think about how we can use autofill to make this easier. We can put our cursor on the first one and copy it down to see what happens. I'm copying it down just one cell to see what happens. Copy down, and it doesn't look like it did what we wanted because it moved both cell references down. So we got to say, all right, we're going to have to do something to that. If I double click on the first one, I say, okay, well, I want, the sales number to be the comparative number. So the second number we want to keep as the sales number. They're both sales, B2 divided by B2. The second B2, this B2 in other words, I'll make that absolute by selecting F4. Now we have an absolute reference. $sign before the B, $sign before the 2. Therefore B2 will not move down, that second one at least, as we copy this down. So enter. I usually copy it down one time if I have a question, if I'm curious if it'll work or not. So I'll copy it down one time or autofill it down. Double click on that second item to see if it did indeed do what we think it should do. So we've got the this one moved down. That looks right? We've got the cost of goods sold over the sales. Looks good. It copied down correctly there. I'm pretty cool and pretty safe, pretty good, pretty sure that it will copy down the rest of the way. So we'll put the autofill on here, copy it down or autofill the rest of the way. Auto drives it down. Dr. Phil does the calculations, and double click on one of these later ones to see if it has done what we expected it to do. And it looks like it is working as it should. Now we can't copy it this way yet because we absolute referenced that cell. So it's not going to work going this way. So we're going to continue to copy down in the second one as well. So I'm going to say this equals going up to 2000x2. I'm going to start off with sales for 2000x2 divided by the sales itself and enter. Now let's do one more and then we'll copy it down. Equals, scrolling back up, the cost of goods sold divided by the sales for 2000x2, enter. Now let's try to copy that one down. I'm going to copy that one down. I'm going to remove the underline so it doesn't copy the underline. And that's in Home tab, font underline. And then I'm going to autofill, put our cursor on autofill, copy it down one time. Double click on the second one, see if it did what we think it should. It didn't because it moved, we want it to compare to sales. So it moved the sales down. So, okay, we're going to say we have to do something. I'm going to delete that. We're going to have to do something up here so that it doesn't move the cell down. So this cell in C2, we don't want to move. So we're going to put our cursor in C2. So it's in C2 there, it's in C2 here, and say F4, absolute reference, enter, and then we'll absolute or autofill that down, and it should not then move that cell. So I'm going to autofill all the way down. I'm more confident this time, and therefore we'll do the whole thing in one time, and we'll double click on, let's say, the last one this time, and it does look like it's doing what we expected it to do, which is great. Okay, so now we're going to do this one more time. We're going to say this equals, scrolling back up top, we want the sales for 2000x3 divided by sales for 2000x3, enter, and then we're going to say equals, and scroll back up, we want the cost of goods sold divided by the sales, enter. Let's do one more this time. We're going to say this equals, and scroll back up, and we want to do the gross profit divided by the sales. Now the sales number we want to keep the same as we copy it down. Therefore in D2, I'm going to put my cursor there and say F4, put in a $sign before the D and 2 and enter, then put our cursor on it, autofill that down. And we'll double click on one of these later items to see if it does what we think it should. It looks like it does do what we think it should do. Next, we're going to do the balance sheet, and we're going to do a trends on the balance sheet. So we're going to do a trends analysis on the balance sheet. And that's going to be the one where we compare everything to the base year. So we're going to compare everything to the base year, this time being 2000 and X1. We're going to relate everything to 2000 and X1. So first I'm going to copy down the accounts by putting our cursor in A44 and say equals, and scroll back up top, and we're going to pick up the assets there. And I'm going to say enter, and then autofill this down. So I'm going to say enter. And then we'll put our cursor on that, we'll autofill it down, and it'll copy the relative references to all the way down. And then what we want to do is go on here and format it so it has the same indentations as up top. To do that, I'm going to highlight these items. We're going to go to the Home tab, we're going to go to the clipboard, and we'll do the Format Painter. Then scroll back down, Format Paint here, and then I'm going to make it blue again. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to the bucket here, and we're going to go to the more colors if you don't have the blue, and then we want to be on the standard tab, and we want the blue, and OK. Now the other way you could have done that, which is probably even faster, is you could copy these, right click and copy, and then you could scroll down, right click and paste 1, 2, 3. It just won't have the cell references if you do it that way. Okay, so then we're going to go up top, and we're going to say, first I'll compare 2000x1, the first year, to itself. So we want to be in cell B45, current assets. We're going to say this equals, and scroll back up top. We're looking for the current assets in B14 divided by itself in B14, and enter. So there's the 100%. And then we're in 2000x2, where we're going to say equals, and we'll scroll back up. And we want to pick up the 36,527 divided by the 2000x1, the 54,574, and enter. So now we're comparing it back to the 2000x1, and then 2000x3 equals, and we're going to go back up top. We're going to pick up the 48,828 divided by 2000x1, 54,574. So you'll note we kind of have a negative trend here, which it could, we'd have to see why the cash basically going down. Here's 2000x1, and now we're at a lower percentage, 66% of the 2000x1 number. And then in 2000x3, it goes back up to 89% of 2000x1. Okay, so let's do the same thing for the long-term investments. This equals, and we're going to scroll back up, long-term investments. We want the 0 divided by itself, and enter. And of course, that's not going to work because we got a 0 by itself. If we did this on 2000x2, note what we're going to take. We're going to take the 600 over 0, which again isn't going to give us a value. So we're going to say not applicable here. And then we're going to take the plant assets and say, we're going to say this equals, and we're going to scroll back up, and we're going to say the 104,535 divided by the 104,535, and enter. And then we're going to go to C47 equals, and we'll scroll back up, and we'll pick up the 95,044 divided by the 104,535, and enter. And then we'll do this for D47 equals, scrolling back up, picking up the plant assets 56,606 divided by the 104,535. And then we can do the totals. The totals are going to be equal to, scrolling up, we'll pick up the 159,109 divided by itself. I'm going to hit tab this time. Go into the next cell. This total equals total assets. We're going to say the 132,171 divided by the 2001 number, tab. And then we're going to say equals total assets, scrolling back up, the 109,504 divided by the 2001 number, and enter. And then we're on the current liabilities, same thing. We're going to say this equals, scrolling back up. We'll pick up the current liabilities for 2000X1 divided by itself, tab. Then we're going to say equals in 2000X2 current liabilities, the 19,693 divided by the 2000X1 number, tab. And then equals in 2000X3. We're going to say the 19,163 divided by the 2001 number, and enter. Then we're on common stock, equals, and we're going to scroll back up. We're going to pick up the common stock divided by itself, tab. And then we're going to say equals in 2000X2. And we're going to pick up the common stock divided by the 2000X1 number, tab. And 2000X3, we're going to say equals, scrolling back up. And we're going to pick up the common stock divided by the 2000X1 number, and enter. Paid in capital, equals, scrolling back up. We're going to pick up the 8750 divided by itself, tab. Then equals, scrolling back up, 2000X2, the 8750 divided by the 2001 number, tab. Then equals, scrolling back up. We're going to pick up the 5778 divided by the 2000X1 number, enter. Retained earnings equals, scrolling back up, the 57,129 divided by itself, tab. Retained earnings equals, scrolling back up, the 33,728 divided by the 2000X1 number, tab. One more time, equals, retained earnings, scrolling up, the 32,563 divided by the 2000X1 number, and then the totals equals, scrolling up, the total divided by itself, tab. Two more times here, equals, scrolling back up, the 132,171 divided by the 2000X1 number, tab. And then equals, scrolling back up, the total divided by the 2000X1 number, and enter. So there we have it.